Apparently, President Trump used an accent to imitate India's prime minister. So the Indian prime minister is Narendra Modi, and a senior administration officials told the Washington Post that Trump has been known to affect an Indian accent to quote Modi, who last year condemned U.S. activity in Afghanistan during a private meeting with Trump. And this is a story that I just found on The Hill, and as far as I know, has not really been going viral because in sort of reminiscent of the Jessica Chastain SNL sketch of this past week, doesn't even matter anymore. It doesn't really matter. But what I thought we could engage in a conversation with that I was thinking about is comedy accents, specifically to diplomats. Where is the line? Is it ever appropriate? Why or why not? Now, to start the conversation off, I found an article from 2011 from the BBC, and it came on the heels of David Cameron, who did a bit of an Australian accent while he was trying to impersonate the Australian Prime Minister at the time in a speech at the Lord Mayor of London's banquet. And it was enough of a news story that there's a 2-page article about David Cameron attempting an Australian accent. Now, for reference, this is the thing about Trump attempting an Indian accent. So like just how far we've come in 2011 versus 2018. So basically, what they are saying, and they talk to a number of different comics from the UK, and I want to get your response, Amir, is Oliver Double is an expert in comedy at Kent University. He says with comic routines, people are more touchy if the group you are impersonating has a history of serious prejudice. If a white person puts on a Pakistani accent, there will be a frisson in the audience. Similarly, if a crowd of friends is out for the evening and one person launches into a Peter Sellers-style Indian accent and there is an Indian present, it may not be funny to them in terms of what is acceptably funny. You may never know where people's sensibilities lie. And basically, they're talking about how doing certain accents might give people the perception that someone is being racist, and they end the article by saying it's in the ear of the beholder. They point out how Obama has always played it safe at this time, that he would just sort of do Australian colloquialisms, but he wouldn't really engage in an accent. So I was just wondering, where do you think the limit is on this, or where is the threshold?
Look, I think context is really important, but in addition to that, comedy, specifically about like making accents about people, has evolved a lot in the past 10 years, even like in the past 10, 20 years. Like you have, like I just remember growing up, like people used to find it funny to make Indian accents. And there was like these like funny prank videos from when we were kids. Like there was this one where this guy who was calling, like leaving a voicemail because someone kicked their dog. And it was like done in like an Indian accent, and like everyone used to laugh about that. But since like the past 10 years, like there's certain accents that you just can't do anymore, and they're not funny anymore. And a large part of that, I think you read it in the quote, is like these are groups that are specifically like have been the target of prejudice before. So like making accents about them is just kind of like a cultural no-no at this point. Do
you think that it has something to do with how broad of the accent is? So for example, they point out that typically Chinese accent comes off badly, as does Indian, Nigerian, or West African. This is coming from one of the comedians that they interviewed for the piece from the BBC. And I think what comes to mind when I hear those accents it's like stay away from is usually like some shitty guy at a party is just doing a broad accent, and it's not a specific imitation of perhaps a person or someone that they know. Because think of remember like when Fred Armisen was doing his Obama impersonation on SNL, and Fred is white and Obama is not, but Fred Armisen's impression was so good, his vocal, it was so specific nuanced, to Obama and nuanced, that as far as I know, and I could totally be wrong on this, people sort of accepted it because it wasn't like he was just doing a broad sort of, oh, like this is a black accent, like whatever the fuck that would mean, right? So I think that specificity and context
it wasn't just like hitting on stereotypes, it was like kind of making a caricature of an individual.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, hitting on stereotypes. So when we hear the story out of the Hill that President Trump is doing an impression of Prime Minister Modi, the chances are it's not a very specific, nuanced impression of the Prime Minister, and moreover a broad stroke stereotype portrayal.
It's so unsurprising that Donald Trump would do this. He is that guy who would do this.
But is it surprising?
Like when he says Puerto Rico, he says Puerto Rico. Like he does that. Like that's. I don't know if it's him like really coming from a place of prejudice. I honestly don't know if like he's that particularly malicious. I mean, you could argue that he is, but like he's just a douchebag that does that. He makes accents of.
Well, I think he doesn't take it because when you remember, there's that video of him saying Puerto Rico, and he's like, no, Puerto Rico. Yeah. Like that's like China. He doesn't. You know, he doesn't take it seriously. Yeah. Like he thinks it's sort of a joke that he has to pronounce the name correctly. Like I don't know. I think that I think it's interesting but also not surprising that this wasn't a major story because imagine 2011.
Yeah, we're numb to this kind of thing.
President Obama if a similar thing had come out that he was doing impressions of the Indian Prime Minister when he was referencing conversations he had with him, that would have been another like lengthy BBC article. And now it's just sort of like a footnote on top of like, well, and here's what the Prime Minister, what his disagreements are when it comes to the U.S. activity in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's just kind of a crazy time to be alive.
So, when can comedians do accents, and what's the right way to do them?
Well, you know,
you do accents,
well,
but like you
do
make
voices.
Yeah, you do
I have
voices.
Characters.
Yeah, you have characters.
So I think it's one. I'm not very good. I'm not good at all at impressions aside from my own mother, and my brother. Like my mother, my brother nailed it. Those are great impressions. Although you could argue that my impression of my brother is just like a white boy. Like that's a great impression. And I think that when it comes to comedy, it has to be a free-for-all. It has to be a bastion of free speech. Even if you disagree with it, even if you think it shouldn't, you don't like it, you don't want to watch it. I just think that that's so important for comedy, for art in general, and I feel that way. I think that it just depends on the detail and the strength of the comedian, and you can tell. Like I'm trying to think of like Tracy Ullman is a comedian who I think does great characters. Maria Bamford does amazing characters and amazing voices as well. And you can tell that they're specific and they're thoughtful and intentional. Comics that I don't love are the ones that sort of paint in broad stroke stereotypes, but other people love them, and I think that if they want to watch that, then great. But I think as a culture and as a society, we're moving away from that because as we are more connected in the internet age, we understand that kind of like that show, The Trouble with Apu. An Indian accent does not a person make. You know, like that. There's so much we know people. Like think of like Master of None. We're getting to understand people from different walks of life, and it's bringing us together and making us more empathetic to the lived experiences of others, which are, by the way, hilarious outside of just
their accent, and the stereotypes that
stereotypes that we have in place. So that's my take on this, but I just thought it was really interesting to juxtapose how we felt about politicians doing accents in 2011 and how we don't even really care now in 2018. But we'd like to hear from you guys in the comment section below. What do you think about accents? Where's the line? This is an open conversation that Amir and I are having, so I'd love to hear what your take is. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel. Shut the fuck up. Sorry, I love you. And we'll see you next time on Pop Trigger.